Hey Luke, can you make the agenda a little bit bigger?
Looks like we're still in the process of letting folks into the meeting, so I'll just give it one more minute. All right. Well, in an effort to be able to keep us on our unscheduled today with our agenda, I'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Marlon Flournoy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the new Deputy Director of Planning and Modal here at Caltrans. Been in the position since November, so nice to see you all virtually. This is my first meeting serving as the California Freight Advisory Committee Chair, and I'm pleased to be with you today. I want to also take an opportunity to introduce Nieves Castro. I think many of you know. She is acting Division Chief over Transportation Planning here at Caltrans headquarters, and she'll be providing the Transportation Planning Division updates today at the agency roundtable agenda item. I do want to extend a warm welcome to all the attendees and participants. As a reminder, the California Freight Advisory Committee, established by Assembly Bill 14, aligns with the objectives of the Federal Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and the involvement of the public and private freight stakeholders, as well as members of the public, plays an essential role in shaping the California Freight Mobility Plan and the development of the freight transportation initiatives here in California. Please note that today's meeting is being recorded. The recording, along with relevant materials, will be accessible at our CFAC webpage in the next 2 weeks. And to ensure that our meeting is productive and interactive, we ask that CFAC members and presenters to comment in the chat or use the raise hand feature to indicate that you want to speak. Members of the public may also use the hand feature to express their desire to comment, or they may also submit comments in the chat as well. Although moderators are able to mute participants, we kindly ask that you manage your microphone settings to avoid any unintentional disruptions. Today's meeting features important updates, industry insights, and announcements from the California State Transportation Agency, the California Transportation Commission, Federal Highway Administration, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, along with other partners. And last but not least, I do want to give a huge thank you to our headquarters freight team for putting together a very thoughtful agenda in coordination with our CFAC members. So with that said, I will pass along to our first agenda item here, which is going to be the California Freight Mobility Plan, CFMP 2027 update. And Kaylin Pacheco, our office chief over the Caltrans Office of Strategic Freight Planning, will be giving this presentation. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Kaylin. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marlon. Let me share my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, today I just wanted to give an update on the California Freight Mobility Plan. We did give an update in June 2024, and it's been several months, so I'll go through some of this information. I'll be recapping from what was presented in June, but lots of new information as well that I do want to share out with everyone today. So I'll go ahead and jump in here. So I'll give a little bit of background and history on Freight Mobility Plan and start with AB 14 back in 2023 that established a state freight plan requirement as well as a state freight advisory committee, just the development of that. And then as part of that bill in 2014, the first CFMP plan was adopted with federal and state requirements. Then in 2015, under the FAST Act, the National Highway Freight Network and National Highway Freight Program was established. and it required all states to create a freight plan every 5 years. And that included 10 elements. And that plan was fiscally constrained with freight and as part of the freight investment plan. And then in 2017, under Senate Bill 1, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program was established, and Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Cycle 1 was adopted by the Commission in 2018. And then as under Senate Bill 1, CFMP 2018, the federal addendum was adopted, and then in 2020, our next state freight plan was adopted. And then under IIJA, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this requires all states to create a state freight plan every 4 years instead of every 5 years, with 7 new additional elements on top of the existing 10. And the CFMP 2023 was adopted in September of 2023 at the federal, both plans, federal and state. And then we are currently underway for CFMP 2027. So the elements of the plan, I'll try to go through these as quickly as I can, but we'll cover the first 10 that were originally in place, and then the additional 7. So identification of significant freight system trends, needs, and issues, description of freight policies, strategies, and performance measures that guide the freight-related transportation investment decisions for the state, listing of the multimodal critical rural freight facilities and corridors designated within the state under Section 70103 of Title 49, the National Multimodal Freight Network and critical urban freight corridors designated within the state under this. And then number 4 is a description of how the plan will improve the ability of the state to meet the national multimodal policy goals described in Section 70101B of Title 49. And next one is description of how innovative technologies and operational strategies, including freight intelligent transportation system, improves the safety and efficiency of freight movement, and how they were considered. The next is a description of improvements that may be required to reduce or impede the deterioration from freight movements, an inventory of facilities with freight mobility issues such as bottlenecks, significant congestion delay caused by freight movements, and any strategies to mitigate that congestion or delay. And then a freight investment plan, and then the truck parking elements that are required. And the additional requirements that are in place are the most recent supply chain cargo flows in the state by mode of transportation, an inventory of commercial ports in the state, multi-state freight partnerships, impacts of e-commerce on freight infrastructure in the state, considerations of military freight, and strategies and goals to decrease the severity of impacts of extreme weather and natural disasters on freight mobility, impacts of freight movement on local air pollution, impacts of freight movement on flooding and stormwater runoff, and the impacts of freight movements on wildlife, habitat loss. And then the final piece of this is the consultation with our state freight advisory committee. If applicable, in this case, we will keep our CFAC informed as we're developing and updating our plan. So just to summarize and recap, CFMP is a comprehensive plan that governs immediate and long-range planning activities and capital investments with respect to freight movement. IIJA requires every state, again, to create a state freight plan every 4 years to be eligible for the NHFP funds. And then we have a California requirement under AB 14 to also have an adopted state freight plan and the establishment of our freight advisory committee. Our vision for CFMP It's a long one. Go ahead and read through it. As the largest national gateway for international trade and domestic commerce, California strives to have the world's most innovative, economically competitive multimodal freight system that is efficient, reliable, modern, integrated, resilient, safe, and sustainable, where the benefits of freight are realized by all while supporting healthy communities and a thriving environment. And we are going to propose that we work with this vision statement, but it's, it's definitely something that we can talk with our CFAC members about, but I think it's an all-encompassing vision statement that we can build off of. Our 2027 goals and objectives for the plan, we had, with the 2023 plan, a lot of goals, objectives, strategies. This time around, I think we want to narrow and refine those goals as much as possible. We're working on identifying what those goals will be and to be able to share those out with this group. We want to ensure that our objectives are achievable and measurable, and that our objectives will be used to implement the plan, but we also want to make sure that as part of this, that our objectives help us refine our strategies and focus on those strategies that we really can implement. And finally, as part of all of this, we want to identify performance measures that measure progress towards meeting those goals and objectives. So an example of what we're proposing to change this time around for CFMP 2027 is a more streamlined approach to each of the chapters and the sections. So we're proposing that we create chapters based on modal profiles. So for example, this first one is the Freight Highway Modal Profile, which includes California's freight highway network and highway freight demand, highway conditions and performance, highway safety, trends. And as the modal profile is developed, it can be used as a working document for workshops and outreach and engagement. And I think we just want to, as we're defining different elements of these chapters, we want to look at, including our California roads by functional class, interstates, freeways, expressways, principal arterials, major arterials, minor collectors, local roads, looking at the national highway system and the intermodal connectors and strategic highway network, looking at California's highway freight network designations, such as the primary highway freight system, freight intermodal connectors, other interstates not on the primary highway freight system, critical urban freight corridor miles, critical urban freight corridor miles, the California truck network, California network, the STA routes, terminal access routes, and I won't go into all the details. There's just a lot here. Oversized, overweight vehicle restrictions, commercial vehicle enforcement and ag inspection stations, ITS infrastructure, WIM stations, looking at TMC information, quick maps, current highway conditions. So we just want to include all of those elements that would go under the highway freight modal profile. And then under demand, we would look at truck volumes, commodity flow analysis, commodities moved by trucks, truck parking. Our highway conditions and performance would be pavement conditions, bridge conditions, system performance, truck speeds, truck travel time reliability, and bottlenecks. For highway safety, that would be something like truck-involved crashes, parked trucks. Any trends that we might look at could be truck platooning or emerging technologies that we might want to look at. And so this new format would reduce redundancy throughout the entire plan, and it would tell the freight story through, we're proposing maps, including more maps and data and graphics that would help tell that story and present it in a way that's easy to read. So for the multimodal freight profile, I just wanted to touch on air cargo. We'll have a freight rail modal profile, a port modal profile, and pipeline as well. And for air cargo, infrastructure and facilities, we'll make sure that that's air cargo airports and facilities and services, air cargo demand such as air cargo activities, future statewide air cargo activity and demand by airports. We'll cover conditions and performance, safety and trends for the rail modal plan. We'll look at Class 1 railroads, so Union Pacific, Burlington Northern and Santa Fe railroads, shortline rail, intermodal facilities, California National Multimodal Freight Rail Network, strategic rail corridor networks, ITS infrastructure for freight rail demand, looking at statewide freight rail activity, directional split, top commodities, top trading partners, and then rail conditions and performance, looking at track conditions, bridge conditions, system performance, and then we'll also address safety and trends for rail as well, port infrastructure and facilities, looking at marine highways and strategic and alternative seaports, public port authorities, intermodal authorities, and commercial port facilities. And for port demand, we would look at the commodity flow analysis to look at that data and make sure that that analysis is included in the plan. And then we'll identify port and waterway conditions and performance and trends as well. And then again, for pipelines, we would do a similar approach. So next, we'll cover the multimodal freight needs assessment. Each modal assessment will include system capacity, connectivity, and mobility, and that would be freight congestion, freight bottleneck locations, Surface Transportation Act, accessibility gaps, the National Highway Freight System, freeway, and express system gaps. For safety and security, that would be truck parking, crash locations, hazardous materials, commercial vehicle enforcement. For resiliency, that would be freight routes subject to flooding and wildfires, and emergency response and evacuation routes. For asset management, look at pavement conditions, bridge conditions, oversize and overweight truck restrictions, and ITS, so the detection and wind information, and roadways utilized by heavy trucks. Under environmental, we would look at the impacts of freight on wildlife habitat, the impacts of freight on stormwater runoff, ZEV infrastructure needs, so under SB 671. For laws and regulatory challenges, we cover hours of service, electronic logging, transition to ZEV, independent contractor rules, planning and zoning, AB 98 and truck routes and impacts due to those to AB 98. And of course, we'll also address labor and workforce challenges and transportation technology. I'll talk a little bit about SB 671 and the Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment. This is what we definitely want to make sure that we're incorporating zero emission freight infrastructure needs into the plan in coordination with CARB and CalSTA. Caltrans will prioritize inclusion of ZEV freight projects in the CFMP project list so that we can advance the state's air quality and climate goals, as well as reduce community impacts, including but not limited to air quality, pedestrian and bicycle safety and noise. Caltrans will work with the freight industry and ports to encourage and help accelerate the widespread transition to zero emission technologies and infrastructure, in part through inclusion of types of projects in a CFMP project list. That has not been identified yet, but that's something that we are thinking about. And we're hoping that this presents an opportunity to identify potential funding options for projects that could be included into the plan. And just, you know, just want to emphasize that this is a high priority for Caltrans. Some of the outreach that we're going to do. So part of the delay in presenting on CFMP is we had to do a communication plan in order to do our outreach and engagement. That plan was approved a few weeks ago, so we can go ahead and begin planning for our outreach and engagement with the different communities. So what we plan to do some public outreach. We plan to reach out to community air protection program communities as part of AB 617. We plan to host some industry workshops, do interviews with stakeholders and industry leaders, and working with Rural Counties Task Force, interagency equity advisory committees, Native American Advisory Committee, regional transportation planning, you know, RTPAs, MPOs, as well as working with CFAC as we are developing our plan, as we're developing our, you know, our goals, objectives, strategies. We're really gonna focus on that outreach and engagement to make sure that this plan is meaningful and useful in California. And we also have outreach materials that we're currently developing. Those we have questions for our survey instrument that we're working on. And so we hope to have those materials wrapped up to be able to share out with folks in the very near future. Our critical milestones are between now and December 2026. We will be developing the plan. We have a little over a year and a half to complete that work. We're well underway restructuring our plan, our chapters, those profiles for each chapter, and doing the needs assessment and deciding how we're going to approach the outreach and engagement. And between December 2026 through June of 2027, we will have the public review process. And in June 2027 through September, it will be submitted to FHWA for review and approval. Hopefully it will be adopted by September 30th, 2027. Between September and December of 2027, the final circulation and remediation of the plan will be done. For our freight implementation plan, again, we really want to focus on those strategies and actions that we can measure and implement, and those actions will identify responsible agencies, industries, ports, etc., who can help us achieve the actions and strategies that we're striving for. And the implementation plan will identify the projects that align with the strategies and actions and tie to TCEP funds to ensure that the projects that are moving forward are truly freight projects and that an applicant will be successful when submitting these grant applications. And an idea that we have is to look for volunteers to develop technical advisory groups or working committees to come up with some of these objectives and strategies and actions to help us be successful with the project selection process and ensure that we are improving our overall freight system in California. And with that, I wanted to open it up to the committee to see if there are any questions, comments, or suggestions as we move ahead with CFMP 2027 development. Thank you.
Caitlin, we do have one person raising their hand.
Okay.
Hey
Harry.
everyone, Kerry Cartwright, Port of LA. Caitlin, a couple questions and comments on the working groups committees. Have you thus identified the specific subject matter yet? Or you still do that and then you'll issue a request for volunteers?
We have not identified those yet. That's something that we're hoping to do. So we are in the process of transitioning our program manager, our CFMP program manager. That person will be on board next week. And I think that's one of the first tasks that this person will tackle is to start coming up with those topics and the different technical advisory groups. And of course, we want folks to be interested in the topics and volunteering for those topics that that you're passionate about and you want to see move forward. So we will work on that in the next, probably in the next month or so.
Okay. And then next issue is the National Multimodal Freight Network. Some of us are preparing comments to submit officially to the Federal Register docket, US2D docket, and one, I presume Caltrans will be submitting something, and it's something that Caltrans can share so that we can possibly reiterate some of your comments. We have noticed some blatant inconsistencies between the NHFN and the NMFN. Too much of a mouthful there, which is frustrating because most of us spend a lot of time on submitting requests through Caltrans or our MPO for the critical urban freight corridor routes and directly in the past to USDOT. So whatever you guys can share in advance of the deadline of February 27th would be appreciated. And then next question, where are you at in I guess any kind of modeling for use of identifying some of your performance metrics such as congestion, delay, etc. And also I presume you have a consultant team working with you on the CFMP update. So that's all I have for questions and comments.
Okay, so going back to the National Multimodal Freight Network, we are finalizing our comments. We have asked each of the districts to coordinate with their partner agencies to collect comments. We should be wrapping up our comments today. We have collected them from all of our districts and consolidating all of those, developing the map. So I can work with Ryan Castle to see if he can share that out with you as soon as possible. But we are wrapping those up because the deadline is February 27th, and we definitely don't want to miss that deadline. We still have some questions. We're still going to submit. We don't know what will happen next with the situation, the executive order under new administration. So we plan to submit all of our comments, any proposed changes or edits to the network itself, and get those in by the 27th. So I can work with Ryan to share those comments out with you.
Yeah, okay. And I just prompted to think of another comment or a question. So you mentioned in your presentation recommendation projects and program strategies for the CFMP, which typically is strategies maybe has been done, but not really projects. And I know in one administrative draft version and for the 2020 plan, there was, the wish list of all the freight corridors projects, which ultimately was taken out. How are you guys going to, I'll call it, confer with CTC on the TSEP and even ongoing cycles? Because I know Caltrans obviously has numerous projects which they are the applicant. for a state project or on behalf of a local agency, which is great. We love that. But just out of curiosity, how will will there be any sort of coordination, which would seem a little improper, but coordination with CTC on that matter during cycles and in between cycles?
Yeah, the next cycle 5 is coming up, so we are working closely with, within Caltrans and with CTC to help try to identify those projects that truly are freight in nature to be successful. So we will work closely with them to ensure that we are sharing out that information to our partners to ensure that they can be successful in the application process.
Thanks.
And I think you had another question. The CFMP is all being done in-house, so we're relying on our own staff and resources that we do have. We do not have a consultant on board. So all of the work that we do, we will have to rely not only on our staff and the limited resources that we have, but also our district freight planners to help with some of the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of heavy lifting to make sure that this plan is done on time and it's thorough. But we're going to do the best that we can to deliver a good quality product.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Kaylin, we have one question in the chat and then we have a hand raise.
Okay.
First question in the chat is, how and when do you plan to reach out to AB 617 CSCs?
So in the communication plan, it's slated for April or May timeframe. That's when we're kicking off all of our outreach and engagement. I do not have an exact date right now, but that's something that we can follow up on and share out very, very soon.
Okay, thank you. We have Kenneth has a hand raised.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kenneth Cow with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I almost didn't need to speak because Carrie basically asked all my questions, so maybe I'll just reiterate my interests. I think, continue to utilize this group for, outreach and pinging off ideas. I think the CFMP and critical urban, critical rural designations and all that, if there's some earlier engagement, that would have been helpful for us to also be another sounding board for that. So if that's something that you can share, and to the extent possible that we can provide comments on before the deadline, I think I'd really appreciate that. And then second, to Carrie's comment about TCEP coordination, and I think Beverly is on the call here. I do look forward to that and just making sure, and I know we don't do this anymore, but I don't want it to come back again in terms of having projects identified and then using those projects to be the split for the TCEP corridor targets. I think that's something that had happened before, and I think we moved away from that. So I just want to continue to advocate not doing that, because I think that's not what we want to do. But anyhow, I know that's something that we'll continue to talk about between Caltrans and CTC staff, and looking forward to the engagement that you'll do with CFAC as well as with the regional agencies. Thanks.
Thanks, Kenneth. I just made a note of that.
And we have another hand raised, Teresa.
Yeah, hi there, Teresa Dow with Port of Long Beach. I wanted to go back to the topic of the National Multimodal Freight Network and the input that's being requested by next week. I wanted to confirm if Caltrans, are you looking to consolidate the input on behalf of the state? Because we would also be interested in what you're compiling in terms of input and how any of the recommendations for changes or additions would be reconciled for the state.
Yeah, we want to make sure that all of the comments that Caltrans is submitting is that we're consistent with our partner agencies. So with the ports, I know for District 11 and Port of San Diego, they were working closely to make sure that those comments were concise. We can share out that information today just to make sure that you do see those the comments that are in there and any proposed changes to the network. Ryan did receive comments from District 7 as of yesterday, so he's trying to wrap that up today, but we can share that out with folks.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Kaylin, we have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is, can you clarify the difference between the function and the outcomes of the CFMP versus the freight implementation plan?
So
And also, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, and then can you share the communication plan?
I'm not sure if we can share the communication plan. I know that is internal, that came up yesterday, so I do need to double check to see if we can share that out. That was more internal, just to make sure that our legislative affairs folks and external affairs are in the know on any outreach and engagement that we're doing. So let me follow up on that. As far as the outcomes for CFMP, I mean, that is our long range plan. We just want to make sure that the objectives and strategies, even the performance measures that we're identifying, get implemented. And so it's the final piece of a final chapter of the CFMP as the freight implementation plan. So it's part of the plan. It's not a separate piece. You could call it a chapter or a separate section.
Thank you. We just had a hand raised. Marissa.
Yes, thank you so much, Kaylin, and thank you for answering my question in the chat. I was looking into, as far as the NMFN, I was also looking into submitting comments, and I was contacting the project or the registered administrator, and I just didn't get any answers back, and I'm wondering if that has to do with all the disruption that's happening under this current administration for the USDOT. And so I did just have some questions about it, and I'm wondering if there's some answers here. So I was just wondering, yeah, maybe.
So we have reached out. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
My questions that I sent to them was just like, what are the actual goals hoping to be reached with the NMFN? And then also the purpose for outlining this network, like what will be the tangible outcome from outlining this network?
Yeah, and we aren't getting any responses either, and I think it's that disruption in, with change in administration and with that executive order. So we haven't gotten any questions answered, so we're just following the instructions that are included in the docket and what we would submit, which is any changes, any network changes, and any comments that we might have to any proposed changes to the network and why. And so that's what we're compiling. Beyond that, I don't know that I can answer your question at this moment, but I'll make a note to see if we can follow up with you on that. But we've had they released the docket on January 13th. And then with change in administration, it was 4 days later that we haven't really received any additional information. We were hoping that there would be a webinar and some additional information that we would receive, and we haven't. It was just that an initial announcement that came out for request for comments.
I don't see any other hands raised or any further comments in the chat at this time.
Great, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation, Kaylin. And I especially appreciate the interest from all the members and in terms of wanting to contribute. So definitely we've captured some action items. And one of the things I wanted to mention too regarding the comms plan, just kind of reiterating, it is kind of internal in nature. We do coordinate with our media and our Ledge Affairs folks on that. But if there's a particular area that you're interested in, we can certainly see if we can, send you some of that particular information. So, so just a heads up there. All right. With that said, next up on our agenda is the Port of San Diego's Maritime Clean Air Strategy, and that's going to be presented by Maggie Weber, who is a principal at the Port of San Diego. So I'll turn it over to Maggie. Thank you.
Thanks, Marlon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maggie Weber, and I've recently transitioned to be the legislative policy administrator with the government relations team. But before that, I spent about 7 years working on environmental planning at the Port of San Diego, working primarily on clean air and community initiatives. And so today I'm here to talk about our Maritime Clean Air Strategy that was adopted in October 2021. And to give a little background for those not familiar with the Port of San Diego, we are a special district of the state of California. We are a trustee of the submerged land and shoreline around San Diego Bay. We manage it in partnership with the Navy, and the port itself is responsible for 34 miles of shoreline of San Diego Bay. We are the 4th largest port in the state. We have an economic impact of $26.1 billion towards the state of California. That was for fiscal year 23. And we're also one of 18 strategic military ports in the United States, supporting military operations in San Diego County and up and down the West Coast. We only have one container service, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of as ports, Dole Fresh Fruit, and we otherwise specialize in dry bulk, break bulk, cruise, fishing, recreation, and tourism. We have a joke in the port industry. If you've seen one port, you've seen one port. We're all a little different, but happily contribute and do our part to the freight infrastructure network in California. So with that, let's talk about the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. Again, this was adopted in October 2021 with a vision of health equity for all. And let's see, there we go. And so when devising a plan like this, context is everything. And this slide shows the regulatory context we entered when embarking on creating the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. For those that don't intimately work in this space, we have the Clean Air Act that is administered by the EPA at the federal level. Then we have the California Clean Air Act that is administered by the California Air Resources Board. And then throughout the state, there's several local air districts. Here in San Diego, we have the San Diego Air Pollution Control District. They focus on stationary sources and toxins in the region. And then again, here we are, Port of San Diego. We have the Port Act, which is how we operate. And again, we're a special district of the state. And going down further to state and regional efforts, we have California Sustainable Freight Action Plan, partnership with Caltrans. We've got Community Air Protection Blueprint, CARB. We have executive orders from the governor's office telling us to focus on the transition to zero emissions. And the catalyst for developing the Maritime Clean Air Strategy really was AB 617, which was signed into law in 2017. I'm sure many of you are familiar with AB 617, but it established the California Community Air Protection Program. And this made it so that we knew that it was time to update our 2007 Clean Air Plan. The legislation required new community-focused and community-driven actions to reduce air pollution and improve public health in communities that experience disproportionate burdens from exposure to air pollutants. Part of this action directed identified communities in partnership with their local air board to create community emission reduction plans, or CERPs as they're all known, to create a roadmap for reducing emissions and improving air quality within the identified communities. The program also allocated state funding to local air districts to help implement CERP initiatives. So with the regulatory and legislative context in mind, in 2019, port staff began developing the Maritime Clean Air Strategy as an update to our prior Clean Air Plan that was adopted in 2007. So development of the MCAS, the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, was developed in tandem with the Portside Community Emission Reduction Program, the CERP. The Portside community, which is the neighborhoods adjacent to Port of San Diego, including Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, and West National City, was one of the initial communities selected statewide to participate in the program in 2019 because it had some of the highest air pollution levels in the state of California. Although the CERP covers impacts beyond the port's control, both clean air plans were developed to be complementary. The MCAS focuses on maritime emissions within the port's control, and then the CERP focuses on other emission sources and also doubles down on what the port can do to reduce emissions in the communities. Our Board of Port Commissioners adopted the MCAS in October 2021, and since then, 2/3 of the objectives have been implemented. We're actually even starting to talk about our MCAS 2.0, which is a working title for what else we can start focusing on as we wrap up implementation of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. So this was the initial structure of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. It started as a document focused on aligning projects that would reduce air emissions associated with the port's maritime operations with available grant opportunities. Our goal was to create several shovel-ready programs so when grant opportunities opened up, we would be ready for them. It was only focused on reducing emissions associated with the 7 maritime sources you see on the left: ocean-going vessels, harbor craft, trucks, cargo handling equipment on our terminals, rail, stationary uses, such as some of our shipbuilders and the port's own fleet. What the strategy evolved into was so much more. The evolution of the strategy is the result of the integrated planning approach we use here at the Port of San Diego. Integrated planning is a cross-functional process that ensures all stakeholders are involved at the right time. Checking in with community and stakeholders early and often was key to the success we have experienced implementing the MCAS. It definitely takes a little longer, but it results in a much more robust plan that everyone has bought into. This is one of my favorite slides right here. It's busy, there's a lot going on, but it really showcases the integrated planning approach, the steps and the process staff engaged in to develop the MCAS. So the MCAS was developed over the course of 18 months, mostly from my bedroom home office during COVID. The top row on the slide identifies the 6 check-ins we had with our board to seek direction on how to develop the plan. The rest of the slide really showcases all of the public engagement. As I mentioned before, the AB 617 SERP and Port MCAS were developed in tandem. I like to think of them as sister documents. The Port utilized the different planning committees that were formed to develop the SERP, such as the overarching steering committee, the truck, and Port subcommittees. We also created our own subcommittee of interested stakeholders and residents, the MCAS subcommittee. Stakeholders included tenants, industry partners, and representatives from other local government agencies, and of course, community members. Each gray box represents the meeting occurrence. The number within each box identifies how many people participated in each meeting. The yellow stars identify virtual community meetings. Again, we did not meet in person because the plan was developed during COVID. The photos on the bottom are the same plans that were on those photos show the evolution of our discussion draft, our revised draft, and then our final draft. Again, that was adopted in October 2021. So here is the evolved adopted structure, which you can see is much more robust than where we started, thanks to integrated planning, which this evolved based on the community and stakeholder feedback we received. We heard loud and clear that folks wanted more of a focus on public health and community. And so we added the stakeholder priorities on the right. The adopted MCAS includes a vision of health equity for all, with near and long-term goals focused on both the original emission sources, but also those stakeholder priorities that we mentioned, which are ongoing commitments we have to public health and keeping the community informed as we move along from project to project. The primary benefit is cleaner air, but there are also several co-benefits to the plan that are identified at the bottom of this slide. So next, we have our near-term goals that are primarily have a horizon of next year. And our board had a very ambitious goal of having 40% of the trucks that call to and from our marine cargo terminals be zero emission. For a variety of reasons, I don't think we are going to meet that goal. However, we have started working on a EIR for our zero emission truck stop, which will also have a trucking as a service program that we hope many of the truckers that call our port will take advantage of to trying before they buy the new zero emission truck technology. Cargo handling equipment, we have completed that goal. We have actually exceeded those emission reductions that we were targeting. A big part of that was the acquisition of the first dual mobile harbor crane in North America. That was acquired about a little over a year ago. That replaced the dirtiest piece of equipment, a Tier 0 Gottwald crane. So that was a huge improvement for our emissions portfolio as far as cargo handling equipment goes. Harborcraft, we have started operating our zero emission tug, the Crowley E-Wolf. That's the first one in the United States. And we also have received some grants for ferry and excursion vessels to transition to zero emission. Those are in the process of being acquired. And we're also committed to installing shore power for all of these hovercraft vessels. We have established a port fleet procurement policy that's focusing on transitioning everything to zero or near zero emission vehicles. We are about halfway done with turning over our fleet to zero emissions, and then ocean-going vessels, expanding our shore power and alternative emission reduction technology, which 2 additional shore power systems at our National City Marine Cargo Terminal should be up later this year. In addition to the shore power we have at our 10th Avenue Marine Terminal that serves Dole fresh fruit. And we also have 2 shore power plugs at our cruise ship terminals. So the long-term goals of the vision for 2030 were a bit farther out. And like I mentioned before, we've already started working on the Maritime Clean Air Strategy update. So these long-term goals will likely shift. The goal is to have 100% zero emission truck trips by 2030 for all trucks that call our marine cargo terminals. Again, that's a very ambitious goal, and we are working as quickly as possible to achieve that. Our goal is to have 100% of our cargo handling equipment be zero emission by 2030. We are well on our way for that. And the Harborcraft port fleet and ocean-going vessels I just touched on. So we are working towards those goals as well. Like I mentioned before, we also have community goals, and these aren't goals that you do something, you check a box and you're done. These are ongoing commitments we have to our community and stakeholders. I think the slide is a bit dated, but at this point, we've had over 28 outreach events engaging over 1,100 people in the last year. We show up to community events and meetings where clean air is a concern. And we also utilize established stakeholder groups within the San Diego region. The enabling goal is fostering public and private partnerships to advance these zero emission technologies. And for public health, again, we're committed to a vision of health equity for all. And we released a health risk assessment a few years ago focused on the health risks associated with our maritime emissions. And we are in the process of doing an update to that as well, which is very tedious process, parsing out what emissions can be contributed to port operations and what emissions are to other community concerns like recycling plants and auto shops, and of course the freeway system. So we've implemented the strategy through different equipment acquisitions and infrastructure upgrades and modernization. So our electrical system can support these new technologies, as well as we have the infrastructure to charge these zero emission electric technologies. We've also encouraged our tenants who are on board with this transition to zero emission. We've assisted with some acquisitions for them to update their zero emission technologies. And we are just continuing to do research as to the latest and greatest options for port infrastructure and projects to reduce emissions, as well as telling our story and educating folks about what it takes to transition to zero emissions. And so ultimately, the goal of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy is to electrify our portion of the freight movement and supply chain. So this is a fun slide. Our first all-electric tug will pull the vessels in from the Pacific Ocean and guide them through San Diego Bay to our marine cargo terminals, where once the vessels reach our terminals, they will plug in with shore power, and the cargo will be removed from the vessels with our all-electric mobile harbor crane. Then the cargo will move around the terminals on our zero emission cargo handling equipment, and then it will be trucked away to distribution centers and final destinations through the zero emission trucks and the zero emission truck stop that will provide infrastructure for those trucks. So we're really excited about the progress that we've made so far. So far, the Port of San Diego has committed $125 million and counting towards implementing this effort. We've installed additional shore power at our cruise ship terminal. We've also put more solar panels up at our 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. That's also the home of our microgrid, as well as our electric harbor cranes and the Crowley eWolf tugboat and countless zero emission cargo handling equipment. We're also partnering with Caltrans and the local Sandag transportation agency to develop Harbor Drive 2.0, which will be a multimodal freight corridor supporting the different cargo and freight movement in San Diego. We've also, as I mentioned, been transitioning our fleet to zero emission. And we're also in development of our zero emission truck stop, which will have a trucking as a service program, as well as we're installing 2 shore power plugs, additional shore power plugs at National City Marine Terminal. So we have a lot going on. As I mentioned before, we wouldn't be able to do this without our partners. The Ports Collaborative, hosted by the California Energy Commission, has been extremely valuable to share war stories and lessons learned and get ideas and resources about how to make this transition to zero emission port operations. I mentioned Harbor Drive on the last slide. That will be great for creating a modern truck route for efficient goods movements that will enhance our transit connections and keep trucks out of the communities. And then, of course, our partner, SkyCharger, who's aiding us in developing our zero emission truck stop and trucking as a service program to get as many diesel trucks off the road as possible and replaced with zero emission trucks. And we've also been awarded a $58.6 million grant from the EPA, which, depending on the day, we know how available it is or not. But this is a huge grant award that is a game changer for Port of San Diego and gives us enough resources, along with the match that we've collected from our partners and tenants identified at the bottom of the screen, to really have a transformational impact on completing the Maritime Clean Air Strategy and focusing on taking our emission reduction efforts to the next level. And with that, I thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to share what we're doing at Port of San Diego. And my contact information is on the bottom right. If you want to learn more about the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, please visit our website, portofsandiego.org/MCAS. And if you have some general MCAS questions, you can reach the team at mcas@portofsandiego.org. Thank you again for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Maggie. Really appreciate it. Any questions for Maggie before we move on to our next agenda item? Yeah, I thought it was super interesting, Maggie, and I really appreciate the comment that you made about the integrated, planning approach. I think we have to, at least within the planning discipline, we have to be able to work with the cross-functional team to really make something that's implementable. And that's something that we have to deal with all the time here at Caltrans. So really appreciate your thoughts on that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we are slightly ahead of schedule, so we'll keep pressing forward. Our next presenter is going to be Kaylin Pacheco, who's going to be talking about AB 98. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Kaylin.
Thanks again, Marlon. Share my screen. All right, so I just want to give a quick overview of AB 98 and the law that's now in place that was adopted in September of 2024, and it's specific to general plan updates, circulation elements, truck routes, and so it's now a law that establishes new standards for warehouses, and among the requirements, it's to adopt standards that maximize truck routes that avoid sensitive receptors, which are residences, schools, daycare facilities, publicly owned parks, nursing homes, hospitals, etc. And this law does require a facility operator to establish and submit a truck routing plan to and from the state highway system based on the latest truck route map of the city, county, or city and county as identified within the law. The purpose of this legislation is to ensure that the logistics use developments are in locations that minimize those impacts on residential communities and enhance the transportation efficiency of the system. So there are some upcoming deadlines that have to be met. So on or before January 1st, 2026, all cities and counties in the warehouse concentration in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, there are, I think, 12 or 13 cities that must have an updated general plan, circulation element, and truck route plans in place, as well as there's a GIS map component to this that must be part of this package. For the rest of the state, by January 1st, 2028, all other cities and counties in California must update their general plans, circulation elements, truck route plans as well. And they must identify and establish specific travel routes for the transport of goods, materials, or freight, for storage, transfer, redistribution, to safely accommodate additional truck traffic, and again, avoid those residential areas that are called the sensitive receptors. And so as part of this, you want to maximize the use of the interstate as the preferred truck routes. So those arterial roads, major thoroughfares, and predominantly commercially oriented local streets are to be used to be maximized when state or interstate highways are not utilized. So trucks must be routed to those arteries to minimize exposure to those sensitive receptors, and roads that are mainly truck routes and necessary to reach those existing industrial zones. So all the required proposed developments of a logistic use to be accessible via arterial roads, major thoroughfares, or roads that predominantly serve commercially oriented uses. So there is going to be a significant amount of coordination and collaboration. So Caltrans divisions, so Caltrans headquarters is working with our divisions and other districts to look at the requirements. So with our divisions, looking at the current and future statewide traffic patterns, and are there higher maintenance costs, higher transportation costs? If it's with the districts, it's looking at those truck routes and to determine whether or not they're increasing truck traffic on highways not designed for such volumes, and maybe there are safety components. Just some different, a bunch of different elements that we want to take a look at before we are signing off on those truck route plans. And then could it be longer routes for those truck drivers? And then collaboration with our local agencies and understanding what those truck route plans look like. Is it going to increase congestion? And there are other factors that we'll want to look into. And then our collaboration with the freight industry will also be important. So Office of Strategic Freight Planning, we're working on our internal roles and responsibilities. We have created an internal implementation plan that includes some milestones, strategies, and actions, and again, coordination with our districts to ensure that we are informed about any proposed truck routing plans and reviewing those and working with the local agencies to ensure that there is coordination and collaboration among all agencies involved. We have met with the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation to understand, where they're at with their general plan update guidelines and, what will be required. Unfortunately, their update cycle is just kicking off. They will make sure that AB 98 is reflected in their general plan guidelines, but I think that will be the updates will be adopted in 2027, which is right in the middle of this process. And so we'll continue that coordination with them and better understand next steps on at least making sure that we are communicating with them. And again, we are coordinating with our districts on a monthly basis to understand, what that workload looks like, how many questions are coming in. So far to date, we've had very few questions come in, at least through CFAC and through Constant Contact. And just want to highlight one section that does apply to the CFAC. It's section 65302BC, which states that cities and counties may consult with the Department of Transportation and the California Freight Advisory Committee for technical assistance. And so we will monitor any questions that come in and make sure that we do share those out with our Freight Advisory Committee. It was stated in the bill. We didn't really have an opportunity to respond or give any feedback when this bill was. It was basically a gut and amend, so it was approved without us being able to review it. So we will follow the law as we've been told to do. So in addition, Caltrans districts may need to collaborate with our cities and counties to make sure that they're reviewing the development of the truck routes and again, that coordination and guidance through that process. And we will share this presentation. There is a link here to AB 98 that we will share out with you. I also wanted to mention that so SB 415 is a new spot bill that was introduced by Senator Reyes, and it's the language, it's basically a placeholder which signals the intent of the legislature to draft some some language in the future. It may get amended with some substantive language to alter AB 98. We don't know that for sure, but it is on our radar. And then another bill that was introduced is AB 444, which is an open bill with very, very minor changes. And it's only adding 2 words, all of, to the statutory language in section 65302.2B in reference to the truck route plans. And with that, I thank you for your time. And if anyone has any questions, be happy to take those. Thanks.
There is one hand raised. Go for it.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, just to introduce myself again, Marissa Brown, Transportation Equity Program Manager at the Greenlining Institute. I was looking at your slide about statewide impacts, and so I was just wondering if Caltrans is developing like a set criteria for what they'll be looking for in terms of looking at these general plans and truck routes. Is that the set criteria?
So, yeah, I mean, the criteria that we are setting is if it's impacting the state highway system, whether or not trucks are going to be allowed on certain routes. As far as the general plans, that is not our jurisdiction, so we won't be making any recommendations. It's only on our system or access to our system and making sure that it doesn't impact our system negatively. And just trying to minimize those impacts.
Yes, and so I would just request to add to the criteria in honoring like the healthy communities goals that we have in the CMFP, just a criteria around like climate and health, because maybe there may be an impact to truck traffic, but it is resulting in a healthy community. And so just want to add that piece because part of a healthy freight plan is also healthy communities.
Great, thank you for that.
Seeing any other hands raised or chat? Thanks, Kaylin.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kaylin. Really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the interest in this bill. And as was discussed in the chat, the slides will be made available after the meeting. And I think it'll be appropriate as well to provide future updates on this in terms of implementation at future CPAC meetings. So we'll plan on doing that as well. So we are cruising along with our agenda. We will kick off our agency roundtable. And then after the roundtable, maybe we'll take a 10-minute break. And then get to the home stretch of the agenda. So with that said, we will give our partners an opportunity to share the latest freight-related news from their respective offices. And so we'll start with the California State Transportation Agency. So Dr. Christine Casey, who is the Deputy Secretary of Freight Policy. So Christine, are you there?
Yes, I'm not Christine. Thank you, Marlon. Christine just hop off. She's at the CAPA meeting this afternoon with the secretary. So I have a few, not a major updates, but just that this morning she had a budget subcommittee, and they expressed interest in the supply chain and port investment. So she kind of voiced everything that CARSTA and Caltrans and the ports are doing as regard to the port and infrastructure program. that's what she has for today.
All right, thank you, Alfie. Really appreciate it. Next, any questions for Alfie, by the way? Okay, thanks again. Next, we have the California Transportation Commission. So Beverly Newman Burkhardt, who is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program Manager. So she'll be giving her update. So Beverly, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Hi, Marlon. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So we are in the process of evaluating Trade Corridor Enhancement Program applications for Cycle 4. So I'm sure a lot of you know, applications were due on November 22nd, 2024, and we're going through the evaluation process now. So we received 43 applications with about $1.3 billion in requests, and we have about $749 million available for Cycle 4. And there is a receipt log on the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program webpage on the CTC's website, so you can take a look at that if you're curious about the projects that were submitted. There's fact sheets linked to each project title, so you can learn about the project and the project scope and how much they're asking for using that receipt log. And then our staff recommendations will be posted by June 6th of 2025. So a few more months and those will go up. And that's my update for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Beverly.
Thank you.
Any questions for Beverly? Okay, we will move on to our next speaker. And unfortunately, our federal partners at FHWA aren't able to join us today. So we are going to jump down to GoBiz. So Angela Shepard, who is the Supply Chain Program Manager. So are you there, Angela?
Yes, I am. Hi, Marlon.
Hello.
Yeah, I can give a quick update on our port data interoperability program, which is our $27 million state funding to the 5 containerized seaports in California. Actually, yesterday we had our first convening in person since awarding the funds late last year. So that went really well, and it's implementing a memorandum of understanding that was signed by the 5 containerized seaports of San Diego, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Hueneme, and Port of Oakland in 2023. And we will be continuing to facilitate implementing this MOU at GoBiz. So that's part of my role. And there's 10 port projects that are all, we actually have a fact sheet that I can share a link with you all about. It's on our website. It's really helpful if you're curious about what the projects are funding and what the goals of the program are, because they center around port efficiency, real-time cloud-based systems that will enhance port optimization, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, enhance their data security and standardization. So all really important focal points for the ports and their operations. So I'll send those links in the chat. That's all I have today.
Excellent. Thanks,
Thank you.
Angela. Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Any questions from Angela? Or for Angela, excuse me. Okay. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. And last but not least, we have Nieves Castro, Acting Division Chief of Transportation Planning, who's going to give the Caltrans update.
Thank you, Chair Flournoy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll begin with a couple of Caltrans personnel updates. You heard from Kaylin Pacheco earlier. She became the permanent office chief for the Strategic Freight Planning Office in October of last year. Also last year, Lala Tijau became the acting office chief for the Office of Technical Freight and Project Integration. For Caltrans Sustainable Planning Grants, fiscal year 25-26, the grant application guide and call for applications was released in October of last year, and they were due last month. We anticipate announcing grant awards in the middle of June this summer. Grant activities tentatively scheduled to begin in November and need to be completed by June of 2028. For fiscal year 26-27, the grant application guide and call for applications are scheduled to be released in September of 2025 and applications due December of 2025. Happy to take any questions.
All right. Well, thanks, Nieves. I really appreciate it. So we will go ahead and take a brief break. So it is 2:26. How about we come back at 2:35? So a little bit less than 10 minutes, and then we will get started with our next agenda item. So thank you. All right, it is 2:35. So we will reconvene. All right, so we have our next agenda item. So we have a presentation from LA Metro on the Long Beach East LA Corridor Mobility Investment Plan. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Cano, who's going to give the presentation, and he is the executive officer for LA Metro. So I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, everybody. And I see some folks in the audience here today that probably gained some PTSD with this presentation. So they spent part of a good 2.5 years working with us to address really one of the greatest challenges we've seen in terms of reconciling the issues related to goods movement, equity, sustainability, mobility, air quality, public health, and all the things that are part of a comprehensive approach to freight in the state of California. So let's see here. I'll wait for is the presentation up? I don't see it yet.
It is not up yet.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we did work on that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, maybe I'll wait a quick second here. But I do want to call out a few folks. I see Hector De La Torre. I think I saw Carrie and Therese and a few folks here. So do you need me to try to pull it up share it myself, or are you guys going to pull it up? What's best for you?
It'd be best if you shared it.
Okay, I'll handle that right now. All right. So this is our beautiful cover art, but we want to kind of provide an update on just kind of the challenges we had in dealing with this issue, kind of relating some of the story. Some of you are well versed in it. Some of you may not be as aware of what we had to go through here with this project. And ultimately what came out of it after 2.5 years is what we believe is, has been a pretty hallmark, a pretty good hallmark for how we can approach dealing with some of the sensitivities of freight impacts and traffic and in heavily trafficked freight corridors that also have heavily impacted communities, and working together to try to find some kind of consensus and an approach that does move things forward, that does allow us to invest and does give us a chance to make improvements that touch on the freight system as well as the regional transportation system that flows through many communities that are adjacent to freight corridor. So our approach here is focusing on communities. We're trying to be regionally significant, and we are being multimodal in how we move forward. Just as a reminder, I'll go through this quickly. This area is 1.2 million people. There's about 18 cities and several unincorporated communities. These are fence line communities along the 710 freeway between the ports and the downtown rail yards, as well as other transportation facilities, major roadways, railroads, etc., that also move freight through this corridor. This is the key gateway. We've talked about it a lot in terms of the need to improve it, the need to provide zero emission technologies, the need to focus on supply chain disruptions and various things that we've talked about in prior years at the federal level and at the state level in terms of trying to move cargo through the ports of LA and Long Beach, which support the economy of not just Southern California, but all of California, with the vast majority of cargo flowing through California ports coming through the port of LA and Long Beach. But we also know there's many other impacts, and we'll talk about them through this presentation. We've had a lot of basically a flashpoint here where the need to deal with the capacity constraints on the freeway led to a proposal funded through local measures passed by LA County to widen the freeway to provide more capacity through a general purpose lane. And that approach, ran into some strong headwinds over the last 6 years and resulted in a lot of challenges, and ultimately the EPA not supporting the environmental document that we had, because they wanted to, take a look at some hotspot analysis related to the concerns that were raised with heavy freight diesel trucks going through the corridor. And of course, there was a lot of policy discussions at the state level and at the local level with some very clear statements that both the state and then the region would not be able to support the proposal to widen the freeway as it stood. So all this led to the development of a new approach and investment plan that tried to take the funding that we had in hand and try to find a new way with community support to invest it so that we can provide regional transportation value, goods movement value, but also respecting the needs of the local communities and get support so that we can move this forward, not just politically, but also through an environmental process. I won't go through all of this. This is a factoid I put in the slide deck. I just want to make sure that the slides provide more information than what I'm going to share today. But just the enormity of what we're experiencing in the Long Beach East LA corridor, the I-710 South corridor, is tremendous, whether it's positive benefits in terms of jobs created, in terms of cargo that's moved, and also negatives in terms of air quality issues, in terms of collisions and safety concerns, diesel particulate matter, things like that. We'll walk through this here. I kind of put this slide up. This is kind of pulling from our existing conditions, is trying to connect the dots that the heavy number of truck trips that we've had in our review here, analysis, is linked to particulate matter that's coming from the roadway, not just from tailpipe, but also from the roadway itself as trucks and cars move through I-710 South and the connecting corridors. We did call it the diesel death zone. Unfortunately, that name stuck because it was very apropos in many ways in terms of the health impacts that we saw there. We also see other impacts in the corridor related to neglect or related to a lack of investment, whether it's a lack of tree canopy, urban heat island effect, or a number of ground toxic cleanup sites, some of them related to goods movement, freight, or just warehousing, manufacturing in general, found in this corridor. And so the communities here deal with a lot of issues holistically, not just the goods movement issues. We have a lot of safety issues here, and just kind of just pulling some thoughts together in terms of severity and the number of crashes that we have along the freeway system, both on the freeway and the roadways connecting to the freeways. Of course, we have a lot of facilities off the freeway that trucks are serving with the transloading. There's warehouses, there's other kinds of manufacturing. There's things happening in the corridor. Not everything is just going from the ports to the rail yards out to the rest of the country. There's a lot of trucks moving through the regions from the ports into whatever shops and stores are in the Southern California region served by these kinds of facilities. Air quality and environment became a very clear focal point of community opposition to an increase of traffic on the 710 freeway through expansion beyond just displacement concerns. And we went through, and the CalEnviro screen is very clear about the kinds of impacts we have: health disparities, asthma, children's asthma in particular, related primarily to not just traffic, but the kind of traffic, the diesel truck traffic that is generating a lot of the pollution that was involved, with these long-term generational impacts that have been building over the many years here. The non-tailpipe emissions is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on if there's time. This is just a quick timeline, from 2000 onwards. I mean, this was a concept of how do you fix the 710 freeway, built in 1965, I believe, in that time frame. It was just a major piece of transportation that has supported the economic boom of Southern California and the state to be able to move goods from the ports to the rest of the region, especially the manufacturing districts. The freeway is not up to modern standards. There's a lot of issues with design, with interchanges, and a lot of things that impede the movement of cargo and people through the corridor, as well as design issues that create potential safety impacts as cars and trucks try to operate or get on and off the freeway. And so we started in 2000. There's a whole history here of trying to develop a project that would address it, that did lead to a proposal to widen the freeway, that then, as it went through the environmental process, received a lot of issues in terms of needs for health impacts and needs for looking at different alternatives. But ultimately, if you go through this, the board did approve the environmental document to go forward. That included that option. That was really the best of other options that were presented that had even more impacts generated with them. And then ultimately leading to a point in 2021 when the Metro Board, following issues raised by our current secretary, then Caltrans director, Tokso Mishakin, really reflected on the fact that we needed to go a different direction and move forward together as opposed to in opposition with local communities. So from 2021 in May, that's when I got recruited to kind of come in and try to help fix an issue through a multimodal lens. And working with the rest of Metro staff, and then working with stakeholders, resulting in 2024 the board adopting an investment plan with consensus and concurrence from the entire board. So from the process, this kind of shows this. Just the only thing I'll point out here is that we had a very methodical approach to dealing with unpacking a lot of these issues. I think as we see with the freight industry in California, it's not always like a green field, empty slate kind of approach. You do have a lot of historical issues, whether it's equity, health, traffic, other kinds of things that you do have to work through with local communities and try to build trust and build consensus and try to unpack some of those issues, because there's a lot of pain and really a lack of trust in the corridor, working with Metro and working with other agencies like Caltrans, District 7, like the ports, et cetera, to identify a new way going forward. So building that trust took a long time, but then we worked methodically through defining a vision and goals together, what the strategy should be to address them, what are the projects and programs in existence that could be prioritized for funding, what are new needs, how do we evaluate a package that could become an investment plan, and how do we bring it forward to the board with community input and support. So this kind of took us from basically September 2021 to April 2024 when we presented to our board for adoption. As I said, many of you are here that actually were participated. We had to convene a task force that we felt really allowed all voices to participate in, whether it was local CBOs to our ports and our freight industry partners, local jurisdictions, the academic community involved in this, air quality groups that were involved in this, the freight railroads, the business groups. Really this was an approach that allowed us to get away from this, trench warfare between two groups that are fighting with each other, more of a round table where people can work together and address issues and think collaboratively, as opposed to, trying to be in conflict the entire time. So we did include not just the task force representing these groups of different agencies and organizations, but also we created a community leadership committee, which was our kind of ground truthing group, where we pulled we put an application process forward, and we had representation from every jurisdiction along the alignment to work with us as community members, not as representatives of different agencies, to think through what it meant from the community perspective, the proposals we were having, so that we would have both sides of this conversations, and both groups worked well together and really put forth some really good proposals and some good approaches that allowed us to get to that consensus point where we could advance this plan. We worked together to develop. This took about, I want to say, 6 months. So, and you'll see some of the same things that you probably see in other areas, but with some different twists on it, given the localized needs in the corridor. Equity and sustainability played a major role in terms of underpinning this vision, to the point where we pulled them out as guiding principles as opposed to just goals of the plan. We still have many goals that you see every day, from environment, mobility, and safety, air quality, of course, but one of the things that came out of this from the community perspective was that, we don't want to just thrive with the mobility. We don't want to just thrive in terms of better public health. We want to be able to have the neglect or the lack of investment or the lack of repair in the corridor, improved and built upon, so that the corridor communities share in the economic growth spurred by investment in the corridor, not just have it be localized impacts, dispersed benefits, which is what they saw was happening in the corridor. So we really put a lot of effort into this, and these goals and principles and this vision really kind of provided that values framework through which we developed all the different phases going forward, from how do we evaluate projects, how do we assess them, how do we pick them, how do we package it together, how do we fund it. We have a lot of discussion. This could be its own conversation in itself about equity. What does it mean for the corridor? The ways we approached, not just how many meetings we had, but the ways we outreach to communities, whether it's different languages or in person, digital, different kinds of approaches to basically office hours, providing opportunities for public input, just making sure that we kind of worked around just having only a few representatives of the communities giving us information, to really trying to ground truth and provide access to all the communities into the process, so that we got a good sense of what we're hearing. And, things that rose up were things like safety, right? Things like about, how do our children walk to school? How do we ride bicycles? How do we cross bridges that are in disrepair? How do we deal with just the life of moving in and around our own communities that are besieged by traffic, sometimes a lot of truck traffic, especially the 710 freeway does break down a bit. So this is kind of a background here. I won't go into it too much, but I do want to point out that we came out of this with a lot of focus on equity and a lot of opportunities to make sure that as we implement projects that we have equity concerns in mind to address in the design and the implementation of those projects. So this is kind of the way we've crafted together. I won't go through here too much, but it's kind of a broad approach to acquiring projects and programs, leading down to refinement to then what we could actually fund with the funding we have in hand, recognizing that there's more projects that need to be funded with future sources as they come available. We are also rather proud of the fact that, through this process, our efforts really validated and mirrored and advanced what Cal SDA's core 4 priorities are promoting in terms of safety, equity, climate action, which our project really tries to address through various zero emission efforts, and economic prosperity and linking these through. So, I will say for the record that we at Metro, we do believe that our corridor mobility investment plan for the 710 corridor is an embodiment of these principles and reflects what our communities wanted as well. So there's a lot of alignment here. In terms of what we promoted, I just want to kind of point out, it's when we talk about strategic multimodal integrated investment, our blueprint, we realized that by just focusing on the transportation piece and saying that's all we're going to do because we're a transportation agency, that wasn't going to cut it. That wasn't going to really work. We had to think strategically in terms of how do we bring in support for and agencies that are dealing with these other things that are connected, like, for example, cleaning up toxic sites, or providing more green canopy, or providing more workforce development, for example, for the investments we are making in the corridor. How do we provide technical assistance for communities that don't have the resources or the expertise in-house to be able to develop projects that then get into that pipeline that we can fund, and recognizing there are equity gaps in the corridor related to the fact that there are a lot of needs that have not been met, and we're trying to get people to that level playing field in a sense so that their needs can be elevated and funded as priorities, and there's no reason they're left behind because they don't have that kind of technical support. So what did the board approve? We have $743 million that was left for the 710 freeway project, the widening project. We repurposed all of it. We have all of it in hand, basically, as of, well, the second tranche of it will come available in July. And then we have another tranche coming in FY31 to round out the funding program. So this allowed us to focus the money we have in hand on projects ready to go and to do planning work for projects to come in future years when the funding does come online to be able to support those projects. And that helped us really look at the idea that, there are projects to develop together. There are needs that have to be met that don't have a project assigned to it, or there are projects that need to be rethought or reworked to meet the goals of this communities and the corridor to make sure their investments are aligned with the plan itself. And so that will actually give us a time element to our plan so that it's not all front loaded in one set of projects and the funding is gone after a few years. We have no displacement in this program, and we have no general purpose travel lanes. And so we are continuing to work to make sure that we are meeting our promises to the communities about how we invest these funds. This is just kind of a sense of what we're looking at here. The $743 million that we have is seed funding for us. It's seed funding that was put forth by our local sales tax measures. So thank you to the LA County voters, and the communities and the corridor voted for these funds also because they wanted improvements in this corridor to the freeway and to the surrounding system. We believe we can leverage about $4 billion if everything goes our way in terms of the projects identified in the plan. And we know there's more happening in the corridor than just this plan. This plan can't cover everything. So we are linking into other investments happening on transit. 2 major light rail transit lines running through the corridor in future years that are priorities in our sales tax measures. Investments at the ports, especially not just in terms of capacity for rail, but also everything they're doing on zero emission technologies, which is just absolutely fantastic. What our freight partners are trying to do in the corridor and linkage to high-speed rail, and what happens with that confluence of capacity in this part of the county that supports both the movement of passenger rail and the movement of freight rail, that supports our goals to move more cargo as we can through the corridor. So, the bigger picture here than what we have, but what we have, we believe, links to all these challenges and supports it with our funding approach. This is the list of funding priorities. I'll go through what they are really quickly a little bit later on, just given time constraints. We believe we have a multimodal assortment of projects, and we also have modal programs that are looking at future-facing projects and programs to deliver over time with community collaboration and industry to support to identify what those next needs are in future years. We created for the freeway, there's a lot of pressure not to invest anything in the freeway. We couldn't have that in the sense that we knew the freeway as a major transportation facility and supported the lifeblood of not just the economy, but just mobility in the region and the trucks that are moving between the ports and downtown and vice versa. We recognize that, if the trucks aren't able to flow well on the 710 facility, they're going to be flowing on local roadways, they're going to be flowing in other directions and creating more truck VMT and other impacts because there's spillover from the capacity that's limited on 710. So we wanted our approach to try to find a way to invest what money we had to starting to improve the freeway facility and the interchanges that connect the freeway facility to the local communities in a way that was multimodal, operational, safety focused, and provided access to our communities. And we came up with this term mosaic, which kind of reflects the communities along the corridor as well as what this purpose is here for investing in the I-710 freeway. And what we did there in particular here is we took the interchanges that were identified and we're going to reassess them in terms of how we can improve them and where we can prioritize investments so that we are improving the entire interchange, whether there's the ramps, the connections to the streets, the design, the movement of people by transit, the movement of people by bicycle, pedestrian, the movement of cars, really focusing on taking those interchanges, which are just heavily clogged in hot spots for safety impacts and the like, and redesign them and work through them to provide all of these needs in a way that is innovative as well as more multimodal than just a freeway purpose. And so we're not going to be able to fund a lot of these with the funding we have. We want to create that blueprint where we start prioritizing and picking the top ones that go for grants and then pipelining the rest of them so they're available for future grant funding opportunities at the state level in particular and at the federal level as different programs come and go. I won't go through this here, but we're going to be evaluating these projects a little bit differently in terms of trying to front load some of the community concerns and issues in the design so we don't have that fight at the back end when there's environmental process, when there's comment from the community. We want to make sure the community is engaged and included up front as part of our equity promise to them, but also in terms of building that collaboration and making sure the project serves their needs as well as the needs of the facility. So we have about, $170 million allocated, another $40 million reserved. So we have about $210 million we're putting into the freeway program, the Mosaic program, as well as some other improvements to the roadway to reduce particulate matter and also deal with some of the ramp issues and potential deck issues along the way. In goods movement in particular, I did want to point out that, a lot of the funding we have is not eligible for activities at the ports. It's really for things off the port property and land side. And so one of the priorities that we identified is really looking at the question of how do we move cargo with a cleaner technology. We have a zero emission truck program where we're trying to provide support for infrastructure to facilitate the adoption of zero emission trucks in the corridor. We have a goods movement freight rail study that is intended to really work with the Alameda corridor, with the ports, the freight railroads, and the communities to identify how do we move more cargo by freight rail through the Alameda corridor and take advantage of the great investments at the ports to be able to move, if not more trucks off of the roadway, that to absorb more of the future truck traffic that will be on the roadway in the trench that we have currently. And then a freight rail electrification pilot project, really looking at how do we move to that next step with trying to move cargo as sustainably and with few emissions as possible from the ports through the region and finding strategies that do work and that make sense so that we can all move forward with something there, whether it's a pilot or whether it's advancing what's already happening in the railroad industry. Very quickly, our focus on arterial roadways has been on complete streets and really investing in we're not widening streets and roadways like we would in the past. We're looking at ways to improve roadways, but also improve the movement of people through different modes along the corridor, whether it's through, protected bicycle lanes, pedestrian improvements, or just facilitating more technology and working with these local jurisdictions to improve what they identified as the 5 most important corridors to invest in with this plan. And we also have a very ambitious project to replace the bridge and reconfigure some of the routing in the park space where the 710 ends, and then you turn off into Long Beach. That's mostly led by the city of Long Beach, and we're supporting them with this effort. Transit projects, very quickly. We don't have a lot of transit projects that were identified beyond like massive light rail ones. So we're going to be working with the communities to identify how do we create transit corridors. Maybe it's a full build out, maybe it's not a full build out, maybe it's striping, maybe it's something else. How do we move buses through this traffic faster across bridges or along major corridors to be able to promote more mobility by transit that usually gets stuck behind trucks and cars in the corridor. And so we have $125 million we're investing on the transit side. That does include some operational and safety improvements as well. Active transportation is obviously a very important goal for any community. We've been very fortunate that a lot of our communities have had projects that were funded through the various state programs, State Active Transportation Program and the MPO version of it, as well as other funding opportunities. So, we didn't have a number of projects that were ready to go. So we reserved more funding here to fund future projects that are developed to help support the network of ATP in the corridor. And so these are some of them that we're looking at. Some of it's some planning money to help define those future projects, and some of it are existing projects that are connecting us to first last mile opportunities to our existing rail lines and our future rail lines that will be serving this corridor. And that's $100 million invested in there. So one of the things I want to draw on here is that we have two unique programs that we believe are hallmarks of the investment plan. We're putting funding in. It was with great controversy in some ways. Either it's not enough money or why are we spending it, right? It's the idea is how do we invest transportation funds in a way that supports community needs, given the fact that now the funding doesn't always align with those needs. And so what we're doing here is taking $40 million as really catalyst funds for us to be able to work with the communities and bring in stakeholders and bring in other funding partners to identify different approaches to support community programs. There are 15 that were identified. And how do we create a sustainable approach where funding comes in to support projects and programs that are elevated through our process that we can't fund directly with our funding process. So it's a way for us to continue that leadership and that commitment to the corridor, that we're looking at them holistically and not just shoving off any of their other community needs to other partners and hope they happen with us saying we're only doing transportation. As part of Metro's commitment to work collaboratively with LA County, with different health agencies, with different workforce development agencies, et cetera, to try to provide support to these corridor communities that have tremendous equity challenge and generational impacts in a way that helps them along with the massive transportation investment we're making. And that last part, the startup fund, cool little nickname there. This is funding that's dedicated towards that technical assistance question to help those communities that need support to get their projects moving up, to get them ready to go, to close that equity gap. And we're front loading these funds now so that they have access to it as soon as possible. I think I'm going to end here because I think I'm running out of time. But we have a plan to go forward with working groups, focus on these various different kinds of categories of funds and the 15 community programs that are in here. You can take a look at that run the gamut of things that we've worked on with the Gateway Cities COG. I think Hector's on here still, and they've done a tremendous job as local jurisdictions and partners raising these issues up and bringing them to us as priorities. And we included them in our plan because they reflect what the community has been saying from that perspective. And I'll finish with investment plan benefits. This is loose. We obviously have a lot of defining of projects and programs in the future, not just things we have today, that we can't really quantify everything, but these are some estimates and these are some goals for us to work towards where we recognize that the benefits need to follow the investment. And we believe we can do it in a way that addresses all these issues that are directly linked to our goals and our vision for the corridor and move the communities forward in a way that they've told us they wanted to see our investment provide a better future for them and for their children. So we have a bunch of next steps, but we're moving forward. We got to get some consultants, some staff, and launch it, probably launching towards the end of the year. So stay tuned. But I just want to kind of present this here and really talk about the challenges we had with the freeway project for widening, for freight purposes, for other purposes that basically ran ashore, and turning that around through multimodal investment, equity, sustainability, and goods movement focus, and to try to create a collaborative framework for us to deal with these problems and not get stuck there so we can get investment out the door and start moving towards what we need, knowing that there's more to come and more improvements and more funding that we need down the road so we can advance these goals in this generation. So with that, I will unshare my screen and happy to take any questions from the group.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. And while maybe folks are thinking about what type of questions they want to ask, I just want to, commend you and the LA Metro team, for turning this around. I think it's a really commendable effort. One of the questions I have is you talked about the trust building with the community. And I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to kind of get some of your perspective. As you move forward, how do you keep that momentum going? Because we're doing a lot of work here at Caltrans to try to scale up engagement on all of our projects. And I think one of the big challenges is, we have different handoffs, from phase to phase on projects, and different teams are touching these projects. And so, how do you make sure as you're building that trust in the beginning, that kind of carries out throughout the process?
No, that's a great question, because it's the question we get from the community groups, as in, how do we know you'll keep your promises that you told us at the start? And so first part is, and I think you're finding this as well, that the model for how do you do these projects is shifting to where we're front loading more community outreach, more investment is needed, and more time in some cases is needed to get the community buy-in as in the design part, because they don't really trust a lot of things that are, pre-baked, and they're just coming in to comment on it at the end. They want to be at the table really to help with that, especially for localized projects that impact them. So I think once we agree with that, what we're finding is we're not going to build most of these projects, right? Caltrans is going to build some, local cities are going to build roadway projects, the ACTA or the ports, if there's things like that. So their interest is, how do we capture that? And what we're looking at is in the funding agreements, when the dollars go out the door, there needs to be a way to ensure that there is basically a performance to meet those goals as a condition of receiving the funding and keeping the funding. It's very hard. Those handoffs are very difficult because we don't have control at that point. But what we do have control is when the funding agreement is signed and we move that forward, is making sure that the community promises and what we need for design and even scope things are preserved in there. Because we're hearing things like, you can have a scope that has, urban greening aspects and protected bicycle lane, and then it turns into asphalt and a striped lane. Like, yeah, that might meet transportation needs, but it's not what we agreed to. And so we're looking at the funding agreements really as that opportunity to build in that trust and lock it in through that funding source. And then obviously there's going to be transparency and frequent updates and check-ins on the back end to chart the progress and to make sure that we bring, as Metro, our support for those community elements constantly with our implementation partners, so that there's like a lot of demonstrated trust, that we are on track, we are doing this, we are showing this. It's not just we'll come back in 3 years and trust us. So we're learning more and more as we go through this. So it's not all completely figured out, but we're recognizing that's a different approach than we've seen in the past.
Excellent. I appreciate that thoughtful response. All right. Any questions for Michael before we move on to our next agenda item?
All right. Thank you, Marlon, and thank you to everyone that helped us along the way that as part of this call. So appreciate it.
Okay, appreciate you. All right. So we're going to proceed to our next agenda item, which is the CFAC roundtable, member roundtable. And this is a chance for information sharing. So if there are any CFAC members that wish to contribute, please raise your hand with the hand icon, and you'll be called in order.
Right. First hand raised is Rob Ball.
Thank you, Marlon. Just a quick update. The Shafter Inland Port had, with KernCog, applied for a grant to test autonomous trucks, zero-emission autonomous trucks at that location, and also to an outlying location about 40 miles on back roads of Kern. The grant was a federal SMART grant. It was not awarded However, we are now in the process of applying for a Federal Energy Commission grant to do the same thing. We have lined up two technology providers, Enride and Hyundai, and are working with the wonderful industrial park company. They're the ones that are working with a couple of their tenants to actually look at shipping, doing drayage within the industrial park, as well as this back road haul that we're looking at for autonomous truck testing. And the Cal Start will be the lead on that contract. So that's due in April, and we hope to be testing trucks here by the end of or beginning of, well, actually in 2026. And we're also seeing we have BNSF pricing now for shipping from the Shafter Inland Port to LA Long Beach. And the pricing appears to be competitive with truck. And so they are, Wonderful Industrial Park is completing on their own dime the sightings for that inland port, and they anticipate that they'll be in operation as early as December of this year with that service via BNSF between Shafter and the Port of Long Beach. So that's our update in Central Cal.
Much appreciated, Rob. Thank you for the update. Very intriguing. The autonomous vehicle pilot that you were mentioning. Looking forward to get some future updates. Any other CFAC members wanting to provide an update? Okay, with that said, we will close this item out for our CFAC member roundtable. So the next agenda item is for public comment. So this is an opportunity for attendees to submit a comment or speak on a topic. So please raise your hand if you wish to talk, and we'll give you an opportunity to speak. Again, anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Okay. With that said, we will close that item out, and we will move to our last item, which is a meeting recap and adjournment. So I just want to thank all the CFAC members, the agency partners for your dedicated efforts to be a part of this advisory body as we work towards a more sustainable future for freight. And I'm going to briefly turn it over to Nieves before we close it out to go over any action items.
Thanks, Marlon. I have 5 action items here. Ryan Castle is going to share the National Multimodal Freight Network updates with Carrie Cartwright. Kaylin is going to follow up sharing the public participation plan to Ian McMillan, and follow up with Marissa Brown on National Multimodal Freight Network questions. This is also Kaylin's action item. The AB 98 presentation will be shared, including the link to the AB 98 information. Also Kaylin, and we will include updates about AB 98 at future CFAC meetings. Also Kaylin. Did I just want to make sure I captured all the action items. Those are the 5 that we caught.
Yeah, I think that jives with my chicken scratch here.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you all for your participation. Please don't hesitate to contact our team if you have any thoughts or questions. and have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you at our next CPAC meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.